Hello, everybody. Brian Engelman here. This is an episode of Agree to Disagree. Thank you very much for joining me. It's a very interesting time in our nation's history. I feel like something changed over the weekend. This is one of those moments that it's going to forever be etched in the Donald Trump presidency. It will be one of those points in the timeline. This will be a moment that will be talked about for a long time, and I'm very pleased to have with us Ford Fischer from News2Share. That's news, the number 2, share. Ford was embedded, I don't know what you'd call it, embedded or crazy enough to be in the middle of the madness. I know Ford has been over there in Baltimore covering stuff. Did you do Ferguson too?
The co-founder of News2Share was in Ferguson. I was not there.
Okay, yeah. Alejandro, or is that his name?
Alejandro was with me in Charlottesville this weekend, yes. And he's the current news director of News2Share.
Yeah, so basically between the three of us, Alejandro did Ferguson, you did Baltimore, I did...
No, sorry, Trey. There are 3 News2Share people, okay. One of which has since moved on from News2Share. So they're in Ferguson, there was Trey Yanks, who now works at One American News, okay, who co-founded News2Share. And then Trey and I were both in Baltimore, and now the current thing is Charlottesville, which Alejandro and I were at.
Okay. Now, thank you for clarifying that. And I was just going to add, to round it out, Blake Wally and myself were dumb enough to go cover the Bundy Ranch. So I guess there's something defective in the genes that you and I both have. Just before we get into breaking this all down, and I know you got a million things going on, so thank you for your time, by the way.
Sure.
Why? Why are you doing this? Why do you want to be in the middle of this so badly to the point where you're wearing body armor yourself? I've seen the pictures, and I mean, we go into war zones when we do this stuff, and it's pretty stupid. Why do we do it? Why are you doing it?
Well, I think it's really important to record what happens there, because in a lot of cases, the people who are covering it kind of stand at the periphery. They get sort of this really simplistic view of what goes on, right? So if you watch CNN, yes, they show the violence, but they kind of repeat the same talking points about it every 5 minutes.
Right. And
the B-roll is usually a repeat of the same little cut down that they had. But this was a long and complex situation. It's not as simple as something that you can just sum up with a few pieces of B-roll cut together and certain kind of little like bite-size bits of detail. So for the people who are interested to see everything that happens, right? I think that live stream is really the new revolution of truth. And what I mean by that is that live stream is incapable of lying because it can't be edited. Right. It's incapable of lying in the sense that it's live. There's no sort of time distortion, right? CNN can be truthful by showing 2 different things that did actually happen, but they might cut them together in a way that makes the 5 minutes between them disappear, right? And of course I can still do that after the fact, but by live streaming most or nearly all of what I see, I've effectively created a more solid record. And it's not that I just want people to see my recording of the events. It's that I wish that there were more people doing that. Mm-hmm. My goal in being there was to really have as complete of a story for people who are willing to watch it. And there are a lot of things that people miss afterwards. So someone like a CNN is not going to be recording everything, so they'll miss things that they think are irrelevant at the time. For me as a live streamer, I walked right past the car that would kill someone 7 minutes later when it was on the street. And I didn't know at the time. It was a normal car, mm-hmm. and it was pointed out to me later that evening, dude, you walked right past the murderer right before it happened. And so I still haven't. I've been so busy. I haven't gotten a chance to contact the FBI yet. But my intention is to share that video with the FBI so that they can understand kind of his path before the event. I don't know whether other people had that.
I gotta tell you, I am very interested in 2 things that I'm not getting enough coverage on. Number one, what led up to that vehicle being in that spot right before that 15 seconds that we all saw? What led up to that? Did something happen? Was that car getting attacked? Was it not? Just to clear it up, just to find out.
Yeah.
And then with the helicopter going down, we heard about it. We know it happened. I've heard a lot of contradictory reports trying to find out what's true and what's not. And, I've heard some people invoke a 72-hour rule when stuff like this happens. It's just like, shut up, don't form an opinion, don't be out there blasting people, because we don't know what's what, in the immediate aftermath of this stuff. But I think you're very right about the live streaming being the new revolution, the new American media as it is, because it can't lie. It just documents what it is. It's why body camera footage is so important for the police, to protect the police against faulty claims and to protect the individuals from any abuse suffered at the hands of somebody who has power and authority over them. And then the final point I was going to add to what you said in that opening piece was, I remember in, now I can't remember which riot it was, but it was the one where the woman was saying, don't bring the riots here, don't burn this down, take it to the suburbs, go burn that down. And CNN chopped it up to make it sound like, in a call for peace. No, it wasn't a call for peace. If you have the whole video, you saw it in context. So, yes, it's very important that you do that. I guess I understand it, and it's the same thing I feel, too, is I feel like I'm being lied to by the other media, by the dinosaur legacy media. So I feel like if we don't get out there and cover it, I just can't believe what I'm being fed. And I've been following your coverage for a long time now, so I am grateful that you and your crew were able to be down there. So I guess we've all seen this for the past couple of days, but in the most succinct way possible. Can you just kind of walk us through the timeline of what this was about, how it started, what led up to Friday to Saturday, just the nuts and bolts? We don't need the full, the full rundown.
So I could write a book on this subject, and maybe I will someday, but let me give you the short version. So I arrived on Friday night, frankly, just because I needed to be prepared to cover it early Saturday, but I didn't really think anything was going to happen Friday. Oh. We got a tip, so we went to check out the park. I was with a couple other journalists as well from other networks that I was kind of boarding with for the weekend. But we went to check out the park and just see sort of what the environment would look like. But then we got a tip that at UVA there was going to be this tiki torch event. So when we ran over there, initially we thought that it might have been a hoax. We thought it might have been disinformation to send journalists and counter-protesters to the wrong place. In fact, it turned out to be true. So when I got there, I interviewed a few of the different people there. I interviewed Jason Kessler, who was, of course, the organizer of all of this. I interviewed Christopher Cantwell, who's sort of a well-known fascist, formerly libertarian, and some other kind of figures in that movement. They basically carried fiery torches across campus, screaming kind of chants about various sort of anti-Semitic themes and race issues and other things like that. And they were going to march to the Jefferson Memorial on campus. UVA has a little statue of Thomas Jefferson. And when they got there, there were a few dozen counter-protesters with a sign that said, UVA students against white supremacy. And those students were probably way in over their heads because they were essentially very easily surrounded.
Yeah, what kind of numbers are we talking about? You're saying about 20, did you say?
So there's probably, a couple dozen, between 20 and 30 of these counter-protesters. And again, we're talking about Friday night, not Saturday. On Friday night, probably only, a couple dozen of the counter-protesters and well into 200, 300 of these right-wingers with the torches, with lit torches. And so very quickly it got a little bit out of hand with yelling and screaming at each other. There were shouts from one side of Black Lives Matter, once the right-wingers were shouting White Lives Matter, then the left-wingers were shouting Black Lives Matter, and then the right-wingers were shouting, no, they don't. So it was just going downhill very quickly, and eventually there was a brief kind of brawl in which one police officer came and arrested one individual in the fight, but police basically stayed out of everything the entire evening, which would kind of foreshadow the way that it went the next day. So moving into the next day, I arrived there at Lee Park at about 9 a.m. or so.
Hold on. Pause if you will for a second, if you can, because
sure.
I caught a message that you said, and I want to make sure I was kind of remembering it in context. You said it was kind of foreshadowing. It was a lack of police presence.
Yeah, and there is a crucial difference, which is that on Friday there was a just pure lack of police. Mm-hmm. On Saturday there was a lack of police action. right? There were a lot of cops, but there was a whole lot of cops doing nothing.
Standing around doing nothing, like on a roadside repair crew on the freeway.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. So they were basically on the periphery on Saturday. So when we arrived there on Saturday, there were all of the right wingers kind of had their designated area, which was this Lee Park, and Lee Park is escalated a bit, right? So it's kind of like it's a hill. It actually has the high ground. So technically speaking, it was kind of interesting for that reason. But basically, police didn't really put themselves between that and the counter protesters. What was happening was that there were counter-protesters surrounding the entire park, and the left-wingers would basically get into altercations with the right-wingers as the right-wingers were going by to get to the park. And it was kind of a mixed bag as to who would start it. But basically, both sides were there to fight each other, right?
So
in some respects, quote, like who started it, tended to be sort of irrelevant because both sides were there to fight each other as that happened.
And here's that's an important part that I'm trying to figure out. Was everybody there prepared for self-defense, or was everybody there prepared to engage and the purpose was to engage? We never even got to hear the people speak. I don't know what kind of filth they were going to spew because we didn't even get to hear it. We're not able to break down whatever stupid arguments they were going to come up with. But I've been seeing a lot that it was Antifa that was showing up. We've seen it at Berkeley. We've seen it all across the U.S. over the past couple of years, past year especially, punch a Nazi. Just who defines what a Nazi is, that's up to them, I guess. But you're saying it was kind of a mixed bag? It was half and half? Everybody just wanted to fight?
It was kind of mixed. So I would say that the first moment of violence I think that I encountered and actually was sort of a victim of was when Richard Spencer came. He had a formation around him of about 8 guys who were kind of his personal bodyguard. And bear in mind, this is in Virginia. It's very easy to legally be able to carry a gun. My understanding is that some of them were armed. So basically, and I doubt that he was. People are kind of. Some people had what I would call like a human holster, right? Somebody to guard them who has a firearm while they don't.
You call that a human holster? It's an interesting term.
Right. So, and by the way, I that's not a confirmable statement that his guys were armed, but that was a phenomenon kind of around the place. But anyway, he had several guards around him, and be they armed or not, as he walked up into the rally, as he walked up into the Lee Park, Antifa came and pepper sprayed sort of indiscriminately at the people around him. And I was filming over his shoulder because, frankly, I anticipated him getting punched or something. But that pepper spray ended up getting in my eyes, as well as I believe one person from NLG, the National Lawyers Guild, basically neutral legal observers, and one Identity Europa guy. In that case, the Antifa initiated it directly. But moving a little bit later, Matt Heimbach, who is known as essentially like our generation's Nazi leader, right? He's the founder of the Traditionalist Workers' Party, which is a National Socialist, aka, right, in common parlance, it's a Nazi political party. He showed up with an army of like 200 guys that had sort of bucket head helmets and gear, including flag poles and shields and pepper spray, and those dudes were looking to get into a fight. I mean, I went to go interview Heimbach as he was moving, and I asked him something like, "How are you going to respond to Antifa?" He looked at me and he said something like, "Just another day in the park, just another day in the park," and then he screamed, "Shields up!" and all of his guys got into sort of like this like shield formation and just ran. because somebody screamed Antifa, and they just got into a gigantic battle.
Okay, so
right,
all right,
10 seconds after he said that to me. It might be I'm going to do a short documentary on this.
Mhm.
I've been toying with the idea that that's going to be my opening shot.
Might as well.
Is the leader of the American sort of Nazi movement now saying just another day in the park, and then in one continuous motion, like in the next 10 seconds, he's like in a battle with the left on the street.
Are you a big Simpsons fan?
I'm not a huge television fan,
Okay.
but yes, I appreciate the Simpsons' kind of clever humor.
Well, the first 11 years of that series was just incredible, especially when Conan O'Brien wrote for him. But they have a character, McBain, and it's basically like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He always has these cheesy one-liners.
Right.
So basically, when it just another day at the park, it just reeks of a McBain or a Schwarzenegger kind of thing. I think you're onto something. Having that as the opening scene.
Right.
Yeah, that's so cheesy. That is so cheesy. It's beautiful and horrible.
Right. And there's one shot which to our friends who don't like Nazis that will have some level of schadenfreude. There's one shot in my video of all of the fighting in which right after that altercation, there are 3 Nazi dudes. I have a close up of them basically like crying because they've got the pepper spray in their eyes. And I'm not going to laugh at people suffering, but I'm just saying if someone were to find it funny to see Nazis crying, that would be the place to find the video.
How bad did you get smashed? How bad did the pepper spray get you?
Yeah, so when they attacked Spencer, it got me really badly. And someone gave me water to wash my eyes out, and that took a while to recover. And it actually burned. It was so bad that it was so much of it that it actually burned my arm as well. Right? People think of pepper spray and they think of just eyes only, and it's by far the most painful part. But it actually it's kind of a skin irritant if there's enough of it. So it ended up burning up my arm. I got sprayed again during the altercation between the Nazis and the left-wingers there, although it was a lot less severely. And then later on, so I guess chronologically, if we're talking about the chronology of my injuries on Saturday, as the fighting went on, the left-wingers tried to basically take the park, and they succeeded. They were able to take down the barriers and get up into the park, leaving the right-wing guys completely exposed and fighting basically with just shields and sticks to maintain their territory. And of course, I actually got a shot of one person who went way beyond what anyone else was doing and unholstered his handgun and pointed it at them twice.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, they were throwing stuff at him, bricks or bottles.
Yeah,
or something.
They were throwing stuff up the hill, and the people on the hill were throwing stuff back down, and that guy walked up into. So he unholstered his handgun from far back, and then they kept throwing stuff, and then he heard a sound down there, and then he walked up to the steps and then pointed his gun down again. So yes, there were things being thrown back and forth. From where I sat, right, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not trying to sort of condemn anyone because that's not my job. But someone after this sent me the legal definition of brandishing a firearm, and under Virginia law, he probably violated the law.
Yeah, and one of the most important things to pay attention to in all of these situations is self-defense. You know, we're all entitled to defend ourselves. We're not entitled to attack people. It's a big difference. And that was one of the big problems that a lot of people had that are not Nazi sympathizers, that are not any of these wackos, but to see Black Lives Matter spring up from Trayvon Martin and from Michael Brown, and it's like after the court case was over, both of those were determined to be self-defense shootings. The other person instigated an attack, and it's with a broad brush, the president, the left-wing media, a whole bunch of people just turned it into anti-white rhetoric that there's this manhunt going on across the country. So, I mean, we've been covering that stuff for years. So, I mean, it's really important to find out self-defense. When did somebody feel like their life was in imminent threat? When did they feel that they had to defend themselves with lethal force, perhaps? And that's why I'm just trying to figure out that car situation, because you normally hear a vehicle running up on the streets. You go, number one, was it an Islamic attack? Is this something from ISIS? You know, and maybe this was just some nut job looking to kill someone randomly. I don't know if that's the case, but something just seems off about the car. Does that does the story that you have, does it make sense to you? The guy who just was on a street and wanted to go kill some people randomly?
Well, okay, so let's back up and review. I think there's a lot of stuff there to kind
There's
of
so
unpack.
much.
So,
There's so much.
so in terms of self-defense, it becomes a really, really, really sticky issue when it comes to a bunch of groups getting together for the purpose of beating the crap out of each other, right? So yes, on its face, the right wingers came to give speeches in a park, but many of them came to beat up leftists, right? And of Antifa, yes, some of them came to yell at the right wingers, but some of them came to just pepper spray Richard Spencer and beat up right wingers, right? Among a lot of the sides there, right, people kind of go with whatever munition they may want to use in these sorts of situations. Like, I don't know how to put it, because the one group that I get, I'll put it this way, the one group that brought munitions that they truly seemed to not want to use was the militias, right? So there were heavily armed militia groups such as Oath Keepers and 3% that came to just separate both sides, administer first aid, try to keep the peace to the best of their ability, and those guys did not engage in fights.
Okay, so
basically,
your reporting is that you witnessed a lot of militia there, and in what you saw over X amount of days, you did not see the militia getting involved. They were only there to be peacekeepers, to keep things calm, doing what the police weren't doing. Maybe.
I always try to avoid words like always, never, only, sort of absolutes. But from what I saw, I did not witness any incidents of militias escalating violence.
Okay.
I tended to see situations such as, and there's one clip in one of the videos I put out earlier, such as one of the Nazi bit guys basically got smacked in the head with a flagpole and was bleeding really bad, like from his head. And they pulled him back behind some of their guys who were armed, who were sort of defending the spot. But then another one of the a guy with another one of these flags, right? One of these right wing flags, tried to get back there with him, and they like pushed him away. They were like, no way. And so they were really trying to not let themselves be used as like leverage for either side. They weren't defending just the right. They weren't defending just the left. They really were trying to keep the sides separate. And I think the failure is simply that like there weren't enough of them, right? If there were as many militiamen doing this stuff they were doing as there were police standing around, then they would have been a lot more sort of successful in keeping the peace. I think there was just sort of a limit in numbers. With all of that being said, as far as the issue of self-defense, part of the problem is that, when these guys come in and they basically see each other and they all start fighting at once, it's pretty hard to say who started the fight. And I think that it enters territory where, with a lot of them, I'm kind of willing to concede that they just, like, all aggressed on each other, right? That, like, in a way, like, all of the violence was defensive and also none of it was, right? All of this situation, people could pretty much leave. There were very few moments that I saw where someone couldn't just exit. And of course, I'm talking about the fighting, not the car.
Interesting.
But,
okay, put the car on the side, because obviously that's a separate beast.
Yeah.
But can you recall a favorite rock show you've been to? I don't know if that's your genre.
Rock show, Pink Floyd, The Wall, or Roger Waters, The Wall.
Okay, that would probably be awesome and epic, but maybe not the mosh pit scenario I was envisioning. So maybe I went to Woodstock in '99. Metallica, Rage Against the Machine, Limp Bizkit, Korn. The mosh pit in front of 600,000 people for those aggressive bands was intense. So as you described it, I'm seeing the field here. How do I show you on here? Anyway, I'm seeing the field, and there's the mosh pit right there for all the people that want to play. But for everybody else, they had room to enjoy the show on the outside. It was a voluntary, if you want to go in the mosh pit, go for it, but good luck.
Sure.
Was it similar?
Yeah. So I would say that that's probably fair, and I think that was kind of the attitude that the police held, which is kind of like, if you're getting into this situation, it's probably because you want to beat the crap out of each other. The impression that I got after the press conference later, where police very proudly proclaimed the fact that out of all of the injuries, they had caused none of them. It was like, yeah, of course the police didn't hurt anyone because they didn't do anything, right? And I really do understand why the police feel like they want to have this goal of like none of the guys were hurt at the hands of the cops, but at the same time, right? They could have probably done more to keep these things separate. And at the very end, if they really didn't want to get involved, then they shouldn't have gotten involved in the way that they did. The strategic failure, the reason that this turned more violent than it had to be, was that, as I was explaining, there's this structure where there are the people on the hill, the right wing, and then the left wingers were kind of surrounding it on the ground. Eventually, it reached a level of violence on the ground where there were confrontations as right-wingers basically entered or were trying to enter the hill and then defend the hill. When they declared it an unlawful rally, they sent in riot cops with shields to very slowly push everybody off of Lee Park, right? So this was originally the high ground that the right-wingers would essentially be safe in if they were far enough behind it. All the violence was taking place kind of at the border, I guess, of the right wing and the left wing sort of territory. When the police declared it unlawful, they pushed all of the right-wingers into what was formerly the left-wingers' territory, essentially pitting all of them together. In so doing, there was nothing left to separate them, because before the militia were trying to stand up between them, and they did an okay job of that. And then the porous areas, the dangerous areas, were kind of in the actual entrances. Once the police came and pushed everything, there was no strictly right-wing or strictly left-wing spots such that militia could separate them. So it ended up with the battle kind of permeating into these little kind of like squadrons of individuals on the left and the right, kind of running through around the city. Now how it gets to the car. After that happened, right, I was kind of covering kind of chaos throughout the city. Now this is really overshadowed by the car, but I had witnessed a journalist who basically fell on her head, and the militia did some recovery on her. They basically bandaged up her head, and they stood around her so that nobody could attack her while she was on the ground. And then actually police came, and police didn't have enough people, so there's actually, I thought it was really interesting. Police were standing like side by side with the militia, like as if they were a coherent unit, to defend this woman.
Maybe they were. Yeah.
While they were trying to recover her and get her into an ambulance. Just literally because the cops didn't have the manpower and they didn't have the guns, honestly. But pretty soon after that, I began a new live stream feed. And I started the live stream feed because there was a squad of about 40 or so of the National Socialists, the Nazis, right, in a little squad on the sidewalk, and I was going to follow them. They were about a block away from me, and so I wanted to start the live stream then because I assumed lefties would find them and that this could lead to violence. When I started the live stream, I didn't know it at the time, but I walked right past the car that would kill somebody 7 minutes later. This was pointed out to me by people who rewatched the live stream, and now I have tons of people messaging me, and I already know it, but I appreciate people feeling the need to point it out to me that at 45 seconds into that live stream, the car drives past me for a second, and then it parks at an intersection for a moment, and I walk past it. And so I end up following, obviously not the car. There was no reason to suspect anything nefarious about the car.
Yeah.
But it was driving in an area that was not peopled, right? There weren't people like in the streets. You could basically drive fine. The Nazis were on the sidewalk. So it's not like the car at that point was in any danger. Now, when I followed the Nazis, they ultimately turned. They got a little bit out of my sight, but I basically took a break, and I was still live streaming, and I was actually drinking water from a water fountain. So amidst all of this, right, all these injuries and things, people are forgetting, like, it was really hot, and people were wearing protective body armor and stuff. So I was actually really dehydrated. In addition to everything else, so I was drinking water for like 2 minutes with the camera just sort of pointed behind me at nothing in particular. But when I stopped taking that, so that essentially accounted for about 4 or 5 minutes between when I passed the car and later. When I was around the corner from that incident, I could hear what happened, and people were running away from the intersection that I could see the thing go in reverse backwards away from. So I didn't see the car crash. I could kind of hear it, and then I believe I saw the car speed away. But basically, it turned into complete chaos and screaming. And so as I ran over to there, I had really no idea what to expect. I went past one woman who was screaming. And I asked her what happened, and she said something like he just hit a bunch of people. He fled away. And when I got over there, there were ton of people with incredible injuries to their head, blood kind of everywhere, and of course the one woman who died. They were people were screaming for medics. Private medics attempted to do CPR on her for a while, and eventually the police came again, sort of guarding her as EMSs attempted to do CPR as well. But it was very clear to me about 10 minutes later that they had given up on the CPR. They just stopped, and she didn't appear to have woken up. So I reported at the time that I didn't think she made it, and an hour later was when it was confirmed that she did die.
Is that the first time you've been on scene, seeing something like that? I mean, I know you've covered a lot of these things.
I've seen all sorts of violence. To my knowledge, it's the only time that I've watched a human being's life end in violence. It's the only time I've seen someone be I know that murdered is a legal term, right? But manslaughtered, murdered, whatever this ends up being, right? It's the only time I've seen someone killed by another person.
Yeah, and like you said, it wasn't just the one person who had their life snuffed out. It was lots and lots of other injuries on top of it. I mean, that had to be brutal. That had to be horrible.
Which is part of, and I mean, who knows whether she died instantly or sort of moments later or in the following minutes.
Yeah.
But part of the reason that I think that her medical attention couldn't have succeeded, if there was any chance, was that it was street medics trying to help, and I fully respect and I think it's beautiful that people tried to come to her assistance, that normal people sort of rose above the call of duty to kind of take a pause from this conflict and try to save her life. But at the same time, again, police just weren't there, and not that cops could have known that this exact street is where they should have been, right. But it took a really long time for them to get there, and street medics are really great at handing you water bottles and Band-Aids, right? And like I'm talking, essentially protesters with red crosses on their helmets, mm-hmm. right? They're really They're really good at like helping with simple things, but in a life or death situation, right? You want a real, actual medical professional, and that didn't appear on the scene for long enough. And the other problem is that when they did appear, it's not like they knew which person was the one who was going to be fatally injured. So they were applying first aid to a lot of people. I don't think that the woman who died was, I don't think the woman who died was not the first one who they rendered assistance to. And something that the media is not reporting on a whole lot, because I know that it's probably not normal to talk about the license plate of a victim, but the
1111.
No, well, the car that attacked hit a car in front of it, which hit a car in front of that. The license plate of the woman's car who he hit directly said GODKPME, God keep me. And I'm not a particularly religious person, but that woman stepped out of the car on her own 2 feet, nearly a half hour later with medical assistance. But the woman who was in a car that was essentially crushed on both ends of it, ultimately was able to walk out herself with the help of somebody. And so there was something very sort of sorrowful or melancholy about that license plate on that crushed car that had been destroyed by this vehicle that had also administered death. Your original question was about motivations. How did this happen? Why did it happen? And honestly, the sober, responsible thing to say is nobody actually exactly knows what was going through a person's head when they did the thing. So I will, and in fact, I haven't had many people, because so many people have watched my coverage. I've had a lot of people kind of sending compliments, sending, I hope that you feel okay, if you need to talk because of the violence and all this stuff, and that's all fine. One of the only things that I got that was actually a negative comment was somebody was upset because basically a Nazi who was watching my live stream got upset because in my live stream I was reporting that the people who, because I didn't see the attack, the people who saw the attack said that it was a Nazi, and I said these people think that it was a right winger who did it, and then a guy who is in line with those people then wrote online like, Ford, how could you trust? He's worse than the mainstream media because he's assuming that, and I didn't assume anything. I just said that this is what people are saying on the ground.
You reported what the other people said to you.
Yeah, I just said this is what they're saying. I never said this is who it was and this is why they did it.
Yeah.
But so to go through the timeline of of the way that people are acting, there was a piece of disinformation that came out very quickly where people used a photo that showed the license plate, claimed to have made a lookup on it, and to have therefore ID'd the person who did it, and then they showed a person from social media who was sort of branded as Antifa to make the claim that it was an Antifa who was in the car. And it turned out to be false, and the individual they implicated was in another state. And he posted, and not knowing that he had been accused of this crime that he literally is just like a random American guy. Like he had actually posted a YouTube video like an hour after the guy was the real guy was arrested but not identified. So we were able to tell it wasn't that. What we have found now though is photographs, two different things. Photographs that show that the driver was standing with the right-wingers in the park. So ostensibly he's aligned with the right-wingers, right? And so we can't derive his exact philosophy from that. Is he a Nazi? Is he a national white nationalist? Does he call himself alt-right? Whatever. But loosely speaking, he was probably a Unite the Right participant, but can't know for sure. Maybe he's just some dude who drove down from Ohio to take selfies with Nazis. I don't know. But generally speaking, it's assumed from that he is within the right wing. Now, the other thing, which I'm sure you have seen, is that there were photos showing that people seemed to be hitting his car with a baseball bat and with a flag. I didn't witness any of it, right? I heard it, but I didn't hear any hitting or anything like that because I was too far away for that to have been possible. So I can't say as an eyewitness whether people were heard attacking his car. That makes it very hard to make claims about what was going on in this person's head because there's sort of a spectrum, right? People are taking everything as it's evil, it was murder, it's just like you should hang him, to the opposite side, which is like, oh, these protesters were there, they did it was self-defense, he did nothing wrong, right? And those two opinions are both completely unfounded, completely premature, when absent all the facts. So I'll kind of lay out the spectrum of possibility that I can kind of speculate, right? On one hand, one could claim that he drove into an area that he expected to get into conflict with these guys and therefore kill someone, right? So that would be like murder one, right? Is it possible? Maybe. I can't imagine what goes on in somebody's head. I will say that he drove in the direction, right? Because from my video, I know that he was outside of the realm of being surrounded by protesters, and then he did drive to where the protesters are. Now, it's his freedom of movement on the street. It's not a crime to put oneself in a dangerous situation. However, it doesn't seem like I would have a hard time believing that he accidentally got into that situation, given the kind of geography there. Is it possible that he freaked out and in his mind he was defending himself from people who could have hurt him, or that he, like, quote unquote, feared for his life? If I was inside of a car and people were hitting my car with bats and flags and stuff, I'd be really upset. But I don't think that I'd be at the point where I'm ready to just drive it through people, as fast as I can. And it's so fast that I push a car in front of me into another car and essentially total 3 cars and injure 20 people, right? I mean, that seems like a very, very disproportionate reaction to me. It's possible that he overreacted, right? Maybe there would be a temporary insanity kind of plea. I mean, the reality is we just don't know what's going to happen, and so we need to see what happens at trial to really form appropriate opinions on this. Short of that, the problem is, the phenomena I've been seeing is people are kind of just applying their preferred philosophy to this guy. So back when they thought it was Antifa, they're like, he's an evil, disgusting Antifa. Then they find out it's a right-winger, and a lot of them are either saying, well, we disavow him, he's not one of ours and he's evil, or he's one of ours and he was just acting defensively. No one's willing to claim him and say he did the wrong thing, right? People are kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt if they're on his side, and then they're not if they're not. I think in reality, right now, we know that what happened is extremely tragic. We know that from what it looks like, I find it hard to believe that it was entirely accidental, right? But I think we need to have more facts to know what was going on in his head. I'd like to see testimony.
I would agree with that, and I think it's really important that you can document at least 7 minutes prior. That's the best I've been able to track it down, 7 minutes before that thing happened, just to try to figure out what happened, try to recreate what the situation was. We all saw Reginald Denny get pulled from his car in the riots in Los Angeles in 1992. We've seen communities discussing different laws and different tactics to handle if you're on a freeway or on a road and you get swarmed by an angry mob. Are you allowed, the right of free movement? There's a lot of these conversations that are going on across the country, and then you see this thing happen in real life, and yeah, you got to slow down and break it all apart and figure out if you know exactly what happened. We know someone's dead. We know that we woke up to horrible news and you walked over to a horrible scene with lots of injuries and a death. Nobody wants to see that. I hope nobody wants to see that. But then again, you would hope that in 2017 you wouldn't have people waving a freaking swastika in America. It's kind of ridiculous. And we also know what can happen when people jump to conclusions. We saw when Spike Lee put out George Zimmerman's address, but it wasn't George Zimmerman. It was like 2 80-year-old people in Florida, and that house was damn near getting firebombed. The dog whistle for violence. It's all just ridiculous. I mean, as you're kind of talking about the Hill and the top of the Hill and the perimeter and this and people hiding behind militia, it seems like an elementary or a middle school, just a Royal Rumble, just a silly, stupid thing. But there's nothing silly about it. This is legit. This is legit hatred. There is some bad stuff going on from Antifa, from Nazis. And I just wanted to back up and get your thoughts on something, because we keep saying the right. And the event was called Unite the Right. But the National Socialists, aren't the socialists left-wing? Can we kind of parse this a little bit? Because I'm just trying to get the terms right at this stage.
It depends if you're asking me as a journalist or as sort of a personal, political philosopher. So here's the deal on that. I actually, on Friday night, I challenged one of the individuals on this. I interviewed more of a low-level guy. I don't even remember his name, but one of the guys at the Tiki rally. And he was, and I basically just asked him the classic, why are you here? What are you doing? And he said, I'm a National Socialist, I'm a fascist, and whatever. And then he explained that, in his opinion, white America is under attack, or whatever his philosophy was. And I challenged him on, so you you say that you are along the right wing, but traditionally the right wing has identified with fiscal liberty, right? So, and he kind of nodded like he understood what I was talking about. And I said, so, but then you're saying that this is a unity rally, including National Socialists. He's like, yeah. And I was like, well, why are you aligning with socialists? And he explained, well, we can have, this is what the whole rally is about. It's about unity. Economics is important, but we have to realize that we can bring together people with different economic thoughts, but at the same time unite over in what he calls like white culture or protecting the white race from genocide. Was his ideology of choice. So, as far as whether you can call these guys right or left, the problem is that it's kind of reductionist to look at it that way. So as it relates to Matt Heimbach's group, which I think is arguably the one that we're talking about here, his group is called the Traditionalist Workers' Party, right? So just breaking down the photonics there, traditionalist is an obviously right would be considered a right wing adjective to include. Workers, traditionally considered a left wing thing when you talk about the labor worker movements, etc. Political party. And like a Republican doesn't espouse just republicanism, they espouse conservatism usually. His party, the Traditionalist Workers' Party, espouses the philosophy of National Socialism. Nationalism is typically thought of as right wing. Socialism is typically thought of as left wing. So, it gets to the historical question. Do you consider Hitler a right winger or a left winger? Most historians would call him authoritarian right. I think that's probably how most people would classify the National Socialist type people, the Nazis there. They believe themselves to be in the right wing because of their beliefs about race. And the reason that beyond just them identifying themselves as right wing, the reason that I'm willing to is because beyond just them identifying themselves as right wing and saying that they have a unity kind of within it, is that his point was correct that the thing that is unifying them is actually not economics. So if you talk to one of their more headline-y kind of guys, Christopher Cantwell, he is a fascist, right? He calls himself a fascist, but he identifies as a student of the Austrian School of Economics, which obviously espouses free market capitalism. But he is standing side by side with National Socialists who share the same fascistical beliefs about race, but have extremely different views about economics. Because the thing that they are uniformly rallying for is this kind of white nationalist identitarianism, I would more consider them right wing as they self-describe and compare their left wing economic views to an individual who has certain views that aren't their main emphasis that stick out. For example, the log cabin Republicans, which are Republicans who believe in gay marriage, it doesn't make them not conservatives.
Right. And fun facts.
So to these guys who believe in Nazi racist ideas, and they happen to also believe in high taxes, right, and redistribution of wealth, but that's not their main thing, I would still emphasize their ultra-nationalism and racism because that's what they do.
Yeah, fun fact, we were at the Gay Republicans for Trump rally the day that Milo was kicked off of Twitter at the Republican convention last year and interviewed one Richard Spencer, and we had no idea who he was until months later, and we went, wait a minute, is that dude that announced, we had no idea. So at the Gay Republicans for Trump, we saw Richard Spencer. I don't know, man.
Right.
This thing is all so wacky. I mean, I could care less what somebody looks like. I care if you're an asshole or not. Yeah, it's not. I don't know. I don't know how people can get so wrapped up in Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, and spending so much time on something so stupid. We're all humans walking around. I don't know. It's distressing. I mean, but it's something that's been happening from the beginning of time. It may happen till the end of time. I don't know. But I mean, Ford, I could do 3 hours with you on this, but I want to respect your time. I know you've had a crazy few days. I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to give you the chance to kind of, anything that, because we've kind of been scattershot, a little shotgun out the back door here, and that's okay, because that's how I roll anyway. But, I guess, put the ball back in your court, wrapping things up here, man, because we could go for hours more, and I won't do that to you. What else was missed by the mainstream media? Any thoughts on Trump's response? Any thoughts on what this means big picture? What you think's happening? Is there going to be a civil war? Are we going to end up in a revolutionary war again? Is this a Soros-driven thing? Just any place you want to take it. There's a lot of angles that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on. Anywhere you want to go with it.
Right. So firstly, I do want to dismiss the notion of paid protesters. People there, by and large, were passionately in favor of whatever the thing is that they were there for, right? Clergy were there trying to keep the peace. Militia were there trying to keep the peace. Right-wingers were there to espouse their views and fight leftists to some degree, and leftists were there to espouse their views and fight right-wingers to some degree. I have no indication whatsoever that any of them were paid, planted, or anything like that. So I just want to dismiss that off the bat. As it relates to Trump, I've seen a lot of extreme rallies and things like this where Trump is a theme. Unite the Right was so much further that talking about Trump would make you look like a social justice warrior, right? So that Trumpism was kind of I guess I would say like among the most moderate of the ideologies there. However, there was one moment that did stick out to me, which is that people were screaming, "Jews will not replace us," and one person, in response to that chant, as they were chanting it over and over again, screamed, "This is Trump's America." So it's not.
So this is Trump's America. Jews will not replace us, and I actually run into a lot of that. The Jew hatred on the far left, on the progressive side, talking about Palestine, and it's so confusing trying to figure out who's in what group and for what where's the overlap and the pie chart
so
of all this.
This is exactly why I think that America needs to start talking to each other, and it'll lead into sort of my next point. But on that quick note about anti-Semitism, I was on I-24 earlier today, which, if you don't know, is an Israeli news station. And they were asking me about anti-Semitism and sort of the racism and rhetoric there, and I described to them the same thing that I just described to you, that phrase that somebody said, Jews will not replace us, and someone screamed, "This is Trump's America." One of the other commentators in the same segment noted that the far left also has an anti-Semitism issue, where, for example, they wouldn't allow a Star of David on a rainbow flag to be featured at a gay pride rally, because their view was that it represents Zionism.
And they don't want Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. They voted God out of the DNC platform. There's a whole bunch of this stuff, yeah.
So anti-Semitism, I would say, at Unite the Right, it was far by and overwhelmingly held by the right wing, and I didn't notice it in any form in the left wing. However, of course it exists on both sides, but that doesn't make anti-Semitism left wing or right wing. It just makes you a bad person, right? So to that end about complexity, right? This is something that I told Luke Rudowski. Luke Rudowski interviewed me on We Are Change while I was still there, and actually when I had just seen The Killing, so I was a little bit emotional in it. But the thing that I told him is, here's what I think America should take away from all of this. Viewpoints are more complex than far left and far right, and there are ways to challenge those viewpoints far more effectively than just beating the crap out of each other. So to the Antifa, do you really think that you're going to defeat fascism by beating up a Nazi on the street? And to the alt-right dude, to the right-winger, to the white nationalist, etc., do you actually think that you are going to get the sort of political change that you want by having street skirmishes, right? To the Antifa, are you going to beat the racism out of somebody to the right wing guys, are you going to beat the crap out of somebody so hard that liberal governance ceases to exist? And the answer is no. These are not tactically efficient ways for people to meet their goals. And it doesn't mean that there's any way for some of these sides to meet their goals. If somebody is an anarcho-communist, are they likely to create an anarcho-communist America in any case? Probably not. If somebody is a white nationalist or whatever they are they going to create a state that looks the way that they want it to be? I sure hope not, but but of course they won't be able to. But if they're going to fight for what they want, right? This is a democracy where you're allowed to spread your ideas and try to convince them that your way is the right way and stuff. So if people would start kind of going back to the way that we originally said it, I'm saying we as if I wrote the Constitution, that America set itself up, which is that we use discourse to have conversations and vote, right? To create political change.
And we're allowed to agree to disagree on
and that we're allowed to agree to disagree. Exactly. Then we could then those groups would at least do less damage as they fail to meet their goals. And the other thing that I would point out, and it's something that you kind of got to earlier by noting that aren't the National Socialist left wing, issue for issue, the Nazi guys there, right? If you actually load up the National Socialist platform online, right, you can find what Heimbach's written. If you read about it, issue for issue, these guys, as it relates to governance, agree with Democrats and traditional socialists probably more than they agree with the average conservative, right? If you were to contrast, say, Ted Cruz with one of these guys, you'd say they're not on the same right wing.
Well, what about Bernie Sanders? What wasn't Bernie Sanders is National Socialist? Isn't that the terminology he used himself?
Yeah. No. National Socialism means Nazi. Democratic Socialist is what Bernie Sanders called himself. And in reality, the definition of socialism, technically, if we're going to get into it, is an ideology that espouses the seizure of the means of production. That means nationalizing or communalizing essentially companies or the ability to produce.
And
Bernie Sanders never. Sorry?
No, go ahead. Finish that point. I'm sorry.
Bernie Sanders never espoused the nationalization of industry. So technically speaking, what he was more like a social democrat, right? He had socialist ideas, but technically speaking, he probably would not have been considered a socialist from purely a strict standard. He's an egalitarian for sure. But with that said, yes, if you set this the social issues aside or whatever, or kind of the personal prejudices of the people in these movements, if you were to compare the National Socialist movement with the Democratic Socialist movement, issue for issue, I'm sure they have more in common than either of them have with conservatives. And the reason that I say that is not just to condemn the left wing and be like, well, the Nazis are more like you, right? It's not just to push Nazis over to the left and say and disperse responsibility from the right. The reason that I say it is because when I talk about the fact that discourse is possible, they should realize that there's actually common ground. They're kind of just fighting over this aesthetic and sort of private moral philosophies and generally speaking being assholes in different ways. In different private ways. But
I like to use my words in that capacity. I like to use the fist of words to be an asshole. I find it's the best way to get stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite moments, and nobody watched it because it wasn't violent, was I was once filming at a really small rally. There were 24 people outside the Russian embassy, upset about Trump's relationship with Russia or whatever. And one person ran by them, and he pointed up the middle finger, and he screamed, "You guys are a bunch of losers!" But from across the street, and one of the protesters screamed, "Thank you for your support, sir." And as mundane as that little situation sounds, I loved it. You know why? Because that's America, where you're free to have an idea, whether it's a good or a bad idea, and someone's free to yell at you that you're a loser, and you're free to yell whatever you want back at them. I think that America should be reminded by this entire situation of how useless this violence is. It does so much damage, but to what end? What goal was actually served by either side? I would argue next to nothing. I would argue that if anybody is watching this who was fighting in the Battle of Lee Park, wonder to yourself whether you actually achieved any goal, whether there's any real world outcome for you that helps get the world into a better place from your point of view. My guess is that anybody, even the people who fought, could look at this situation and realize that they did more harm than good.
See, and that's my final takeaway. Just this whole thing. You're not going to find a situation where I'm going to be backing Nazis. I can't understand how you take the leap from feeling a certain way to jumping to that stuff. It's pretty ludicrous to me. But when you look at what's going on and you're trying to make sense of all of it, it just I'm not going to be able to make sense of this for a little while, and I'm not going to back a Nazi by any stretch. But I would much rather hear them up on at their lectern, in front of their microphone, in front of their crowd. Let's hear whatever the crap is going to come out, and let's break it down point by point by point, and let's figure it out. I mean, they've been doing this. Antifa's been doing this to Milo Yiannopoulos. They've done it to Ann Coulter. They're doing it all over. Everybody's a Nazi. Everybody's a racist. Everybody's a bigot. Punch a Nazi. Punch a bigot. I mean, is Antifa a really big problem here? Not to take anything away from swastikas and assholes in Nazi groups and white supremacist groups by any stretch. But if you're the violent group showing up to punch the Nazi, is this the thing that needs to be squashed so we can get back to having some sort of civil discourse here?
I think that people need to start, like you were saying, I think people need to start squashing each other verbally. And it's funny because people talk about how pointless Facebook arguments are, but I think that if Facebook arguments don't turn into bullying, that they're fine, right? That's people hashing out their ideas. And I haven't often been convinced by a Facebook argument, but I actually really like people questioning each other on my wall. I ask questions on my Facebook that make people have sort of certain debates, that make them apply their principles to new ideas.
Yeah, you'll say like 5 different ways. Is it if you like it for this, love it for that, heart it for or whatever?
Yeah, right, exactly. So I try to make people realize that there's nuance to political ideas and that you don't just have to be left or right, right? You can be green, you can be libertarian, you can be paleo this or that or whatever the heck it is, right? People need to start kind of like thinking outside the box.
Trans politics.
So and I'm not even saying that people can be fringe, but people should perhaps think for themselves. And if somebody says, you know what, I'm actually a down the ticket every single position, I'm a conservative, so be it. If somebody is completely right, but think for yourself. If you independently actually believe those things, and be willing to actually have the discourse. Because when people are so extreme and so rigid and hate the other side because they believe the other side is the evil side, that's how you end up with violence in the streets.
That's how you end up in genocide and World War and Revolutionary War and Civil War and all that crap.
Yeah, a lot worse than violence in the streets, really.
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
right.
And I mean, we're ramping up with North Korea. I mean, yeah, whatever. It's a whole other topic for another day. But anyway, Ford, let me let you get going, man. You've had a crazy couple of days. I know I was just exhausted coming back because you're literally out there in a battlefield. That's what it is. You're coming back from a battle. Just to document it. So for all the great coverage, why don't you tell everybody the best places to find it online to link up with your network?
Sure. So if you want to find me on my Facebook, it's my own name is Ford Fischer, FORDFISCHER. There's a personal profile and a page. Feel free to follow / like either of those. There's also the News2Share page, News2Share. I've also started a Patreon account, although I only have one donor for $5. So if you want to be the second donor, then hit up patreon.com/Ford Fischer. Again, FORDFISCHER. I do have a Twitter account that I don't use a whole lot, also @Ford Fischer. But I'm hoping to start using that more because I know that that's part of the new media and I've got to get used to it. So feel free to find me on Twitter as well.
All right. Well, Ford, I appreciate you being out there doing the stuff I didn't feel like doing. I mean, I had this conversation today, and I was just talking about how Ford Fischer's crazy. He's out there in the middle of a war zone, and the conversation quickly turned to I was at Bundy Ranch, and we're pointing at where the helicopters were and the snipers are at, and and I just wonder if this is going on in Los Angeles. Am I gonna be out there covering it? I don't know. I just know that if the new American media doesn't step up and just go for themselves and see for themselves and give us the story that they take away, then it's a lot easier to spin the narrative and completely derail whatever truth is and push an agenda. And we've seen enough of that over the past year, just pulling the veil back, seeing the wizard behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz here. The media is used to getting their way and pushing their narrative. So people like you are absolutely vital to this, and you're so close to the belly of the beast there in D.C. So I tried to take my time over the weekend. Of course, I couldn't. I had to get involved in every conversation possible. But I knew I'd be talking with you on Monday or so to kind of hear it from you, who was actually down there on the street, and that'll kind of set me straight on some questions I had. So
sure.
I want to thank you and your crew for that. Continue to stay safe, and you and I will talk again soon. Okay, pal?
All right, thanks. Good to talk to you.
Take care, bud.